Darryl Sutter has been let go. Pierre LeBrun just dropped it. Elliot Friedman as well, but Pierre LeBrun, who's our guy, got that news.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow,
Yes.
wow, wow.
Yes,
So
he's gone.
but we kind of felt like when Treliving said, let's go our separate ways, it kind of felt like maybe this is the end. It's time for fresh coat of paint all over in Calgary, right? Doesn't it feel that way?
Yeah, but at the same time, like Darryl Sutter had a 2-year extension.
Yeah.
Like that's what complicated things with all of this. It's one thing if both those, because if Darryl didn't have a contract, and I think the year went the way that it did, it's much more clear to say, hey, both those guys are gone. Even a guy like Brad, who I think if the offers may have been right or if some other factors worked out, he might have stayed. But I think just with the way this season went for Darryl Sutter and that Flames team and all of those pieces that they got in the offseason, like those pieces have to work. Like they signed those guys to contracts. It has to work. For a guy like Darryl to not get the most out of that team, like it just kind of felt as if the writing was going to be on the wall for a guy who style has been described as old school, and unfortunately he's taken the fall. He's taken the fall here. It kind of had to happen, I think.
So yeah, I mean, I guess I know what you mean in terms of there's no GM in place per se, but you know, I look at it this way. Now the GM gets to come in and make their own hire, right?
Mm-hmm. And like that's what I wonder too.
Hire. Yeah,
that's what I wonder too with that. Not to hijack this, but with this conversation,
no. Yeah.
You completely. The biggest thing for me with that GM search was how much of a factor Darryl Sutter was going to be in all of this. And if Darryl stayed, then I think that whoever the GM was, they were going to have to deal with that. And I think it would have lessened the candidate pool for those guys. I understand Craig Conroy is the favorite for that job. He's an internal guy. He's played for the team before, was an assistant to Jay Feaster when he was GM, that becomes a GM. But now you open up a possibility of so many other guys coming in who could do it. Like one quote that's gone around, Don Maloney, who's the president of hockey operations and the interim GM.
Yeah.
He has said that he would like to have a progressive thinker, someone who's on the cusp of an opportunity. Like, no disrespect to Darryl. Darryl is a guy who had direct line to ownership and has, I mean, maybe it's not. Like, this is a guy who has a lot of power in that organization. If they had brought in a new guy, it would have been very difficult, I think, for those two to coexist, at least right away, especially if that GM wants to put their imprint on this team. And I don't know, like, I think this is a move that had to happen in order for them to get the progressive thinker that they want. And I think for some of those players in that room too, who were not happy about how this year went, some of those guys are probably in favor of that decision. And I think that this move happened because some of those guys might have said something about how this year went, and they said, you know what, a change needs to be made. Darryl Sutter will go down as one of the greatest winners in terms of head coaches. He has the 2 Stanley Cups. There's the legacy attached to him, but sometimes a life expectancy for a coach, it ebbs and flows. And I think for a guy like Darryl, I think the writing was on the wall for him. Like, not to jump back on the Flames thing, there's a part of me that still can't believe that happened. Like, the perception of Flames ownership is that they're not necessarily, I don't want to use the, how would I put this with Flames ownership? The fact that you have a head coach who has an extension that kicks in July 1st for the next 2 years, letting go of that man and the money attached to him would have been a very interesting thing to do. And the Flames decided that they were going to do it. But this tells me that the fit with him, and especially with some of those new guys that they brought in, it just didn't work. And I think enough things were said during those exit meetings and throughout the season that said, hey, you know what, Darryl Sutter, we know you're about, worth a little over $8 million over the next 2 years. You got to go. This has to get done. It's just, it was just such a wild thing. Like, we know the fates of coaches who were coaching teams who were recently eliminated in the playoffs. And we didn't know until today what Darryl Sutter's fate was going to be. And now that we know, and at the time you're hearing this, there will be a press conference ahead with Don Maloney where they're going to talk about this.
That's today?
By the time that's today. So, like,
okay.
But so by the time this episode drops, the press conference will either be happening or it will have already happened. So we'll know more details about this as it goes on. But like this, to me, you look at the composition of the roster, you look at how they underwhelmed this year. I also think just with the way certain things went down this year, whether Darryl Sutter handling Jonathan Huberdeau, he had to go take a shit comment, Jacques Pelletier and his playing time. What number is he? Like, there were just too many things that happened this year where you're just like, are you kidding me? Like, come on. Like, I understand goaltending did not play well. I understand that like players up front, they underwhelmed. Jonathan Huberdeau having a 60-point drop in his statistics is not good. But Darryl Sutter had to take some blame for this. And I think this is their way of doing it. And if their way of saying, hey, you know what? Like, that we believe in the team that we have, and we're going to try to give it another go for next year. And they need someone to take over and get the best out of this group. And just, I don't necessarily disagree with the decision to do this.